Hi, I'm Dana Cameron, and welcome to my segment of the Facebook Party, A Murder of Authors. Boo! I write the Fangborn books, an urban fantasy series from 47 North, and I draw on my experiences as an archaeologist. My protagonist, Zoe Miller, is also an archaeologist, oddly enough, and she's only recently discovered that she is a werewolf belonging to the Fangborn family. And in my world, the Fangborn are vampires, werewolves, and oracles who are dedicated to protecting humanity and fighting evil. Now, if you are one of the lucky winners of the drawings on this party website page, you can win a copy of my first book, a copy of Seven Kinds of Hell, a copy of the second book, Pack of Strays, and this very nifty Fangborn cap. So, do whatever you need to do in order to be made eligible. Leave a comment or do whatever Jack Horn says to do, and you could possibly be a winner. Tonight I'm going to read a bit of spookiness from Pack of Strays. And what you should know about this book, it's the second book in the series. In the first book, Zoe opened up Pandora's box, which, along with a lot of other horrible things, embedded a jewel bracelet into her wrist. This gave her some truly weird powers that a werewolf shouldn't even have, and worse, it gave her excruciating visions that have driven her across the world to find other Fangborn artifacts. And in this section, she is in Denmark, in Roskilde, and she's about to enter the basement of the very ominous, spooky-looking old house. So, if you're all seated comfortably, then I'll begin. Stairs led down into the dark. I pulled out a penlight, and hoping the ancient steps would support me, followed them down. The smell of rotting wood was very strong. The stairs creaked in protest under my weight, but held. Occasionally, the whole staircase let out a dry crack, its entire structure shifting under unexpected use. Dirt and cobwebs had accumulated, and I tried not to think about what might be scuttling around down here. The stairs ended at a long, stone-paved walkway, about 5 feet wide, then a gap, some sort of trench, then... It took me a moment to realize what I was seeing. A longship was before me. It was nearly perfectly preserved, whether because of the stability of the climate below the house or some magic. I couldn't tell. I hardly dared breathe for introducing some contaminant. I was one big contaminant, humidity, bioils, breathing, never mind me stepping anywhere. I edged down the stairs a little farther. The light was faint, its source unknown, and shadows loomed. A step moaned under me, and I got off it quickly before it could split. Similar concerns drove me down the rest of the stairs, and I was at the bottom. The wood of the ship looked like it did the day it was constructed, painted in autumn colors with a stylized dragon head at one end, covered in gold leaf. There were bundles at both ends, and at first I thought they were cargo. Bales of cloth, crates, stacks of hides and furs, covered up with waxcloth tarps. A little closer and I understood. The bundles were bodies. Wrapped in heavily embroidered shrouds, they were lined up in 2 rows, bow and stern. Most of them were very old, and I started to see gradations in them. The ones at both ends were the oldest, moving to the newer near the middle. I didn't exactly tiptoe, but I was hugely aware of the sound and weight of my steps as I moved to the far end. Without touching anything, I leaned over the edge of the ship and saw the cloth intact but fading, the metallic threads dull in the light. The embroidery reminded me of the gripping beast style of ornament that evolved through the Viking period. Stylized creatures entwined and gripping each other with claws, similar to the decorations I'd seen on the lintel of the house. A brooch was on this bundle, too far away to see. There was an opening on the side of the ship, a kind of gangplank. If I wanted to learn more, I was going to have to get on board. A pebble in the dust by the stairs. I picked it up and dropped it off the edge. I waited for a long time and never heard it land, most likely because there was soft leaves or dirt or something muffling the sound below. But the breeze wafting up from the moat was dank and felt like it had come from a long way in the earth. No sense in taking risks. It took me several minutes to gather my courage. I stepped onto the plank tentatively. It swayed, but didn't turn to dust or shatter under me immediately. Not daring to go out too far on it, I stood. It dipped alarmingly, but held. A quick glance below me confirmed I didn't want to fall off. I couldn't see below me any better than I could see from the back. Or could I? Something suggestive of flashing scales caught my eye. Possibly I thought it was water down there, not a giant snake. And certainly not a snake 20 times the size of the biggest fangborn vampire I'd ever seen, right? Probably water. A puddle reflecting light, absorbing the sound of my pebble. Before I could talk myself out of it, I stepped forward. The plank bowed. Moving quickly and lightly was my only choice. Thinking my least heavy thoughts, I took 2 more steps to safety on the deck of the boat. It listed a little, then righted itself as if both ends were on a fulcrum. The deck was as sturdy as it looked. I moved to the center and caught my breath. All of the bundles had brooches. Some were snakes, some were wolves, some were crows or ravens in that same intricate, interwoven design. A weird sucking sound and oxygen rushed into my lungs. I'd forgotten to breathe. This was a burial of Fangborn going back 1,000 years or more. I checked some of the other bundled bodies and saw that the shrouds were much more recent, possibly dating to the early 20th century. You didn't need to be a specialist in Scandinavian art and artifacts to tell the difference between interlock machine stitching and something made with a bone needle. I was very careful not to disturb any of the shrouds. The bundle closest to me was the most recent. I stepped over to it. Did I feel the boat tip again under my weight, or was that some trick of the light and my nerves? There were letters, numbers worked into the signs. Initials, it looked like, and a date, maybe. 1895. I settled back on my heels, careful not to touch the fabric. Brooches reflected some shaft of light that had found its way down into the basement. That had to account for the weird shine beneath the ship, right? The ship tipped again, or I tipped, and over I fell. My head hit the plank of the deck. My eyes closed. I felt a lurching in my stomach, but it was all right in a minute. I opened my eyes and scrambled up, not wanting to get too familiar with any of the ship's other passengers. Everything was not all right. To my right, bundles were missing. I hadn't seen anything move, hadn't heard anything. There was no way those bodies should have been able to move. There was no sign of them having gone over the side. To my left, the bundles were still there. But now 2 cloak-wrapped figures stooped over one of them. No sense of the call to change, to turn to my werewolf form. I had no idea how they'd gotten there, but maybe they were there to help. Hey, I said, which also sounds like hi in Danish and Swedish. I'm Zoe. A sharp, low syllable. I didn't need to speak Danish to know it was swearing. They straightened and put themselves between me and the bodies at their end of the ship. I'm sorry, I didn't catch... Their cloaks dropped away. I saw period garb. She was in a black, wasp-waisted gown, with an absurdly large bustle. He was in black as well, a finely cut jacket, mutton chops, and jet mourning jewelry. She growled and changed to a werewolf. So did he. Facing the 2 wolf people, I sensed the frisson of their transformation, and before I could blink, I felt myself changing as well. I slid into the half-change, almost without volition, feeling the urgency of their need to attack an unseen foe. Who are we? They stopped fast at the sight of my transformation. Their fur bristled, and they exchanged a look. He shook his head as if trying to rid himself of a flea in his ear. She crossed herself. What's going... It was as if the sound of my voice confirmed something for them. With a snarl, they launched themselves at me. I glanced around to make sure there really wasn't anything behind me that needed killing. Nothing, but when my head swiveled back again, a glint of something gold caught my eye on the far side of the room, just beyond the ship. No time for intellectual curiosity now, not with 2 steampunky Fangborn getting the wrong idea about me. I couldn't remember a word of the helpful Danish words I'd read in the guidebook I'd bought at the airport. Hey, stop, I'm one of you! Not working. He landed first, and I dodged out of the way. His clothing was tight, and the seams were splitting in a way that was going to embarrass him when he changed back to skin self. As he closed the distance, he slowed, seeming surprised by me for some reason. Maybe he wasn't expecting a girl in jeans. Maybe he wasn't expecting another werewolf. And he continued on. His paws gave me half a chance, and I threw my best roundhouse at him. I caught his chin and sent him over the railing. I heard a howl that went on too long, and abruptly, nothing. No thud, no cry, simply a complete absence of everything that might have been. The wolf woman stumbled, slowed by her skirts, and her corsetry, which weren't terribly sensible for fighting or accommodating the werewolf form. She watched her colleague disappear, a small, noiseless movement of her lips, and she turned on me. With one slash of each hand, she removed most of the bottom half of her skirt, which fell away in a heavy pile. The stockings and boots she wore underneath didn't seem to slow her a bit. The whole structure of the boat shivered, groaned, and the structure twisted beneath my feet. I could feel the strain on the boards as they split apart. I was flung up and saw that glint of gold again, something substantial just on the other side of the ship. A horrible noise of wind and wood, a roaring that was beyond any sea. The other werewolf lunged, growling. I didn't want to hurt her because she was probably some distant, weird cousin of mine, but I was damned if I was going to follow the guy down into the abyss. I shoved her aside, mid-leap, as the deck planks began to separate. The ship heaved, rocking side to side, then bucked stem to stern. I was thrown overboard, away from the staircase and pavement that brought me here. I flailed wildly and grabbed at the railing. My claws dug into the wood. My arm was being wrenched from the socket as the ship twisted again. I growled, grabbed on with my other hand, and pulled myself back on board, though it was only marginally better to be on that self-destructing ship than to find out what was in the dark below. I caught another sight of gold not far from me, on the far side, and felt called to it. The bracelet blazed red gold, bright as day, and I closed my eyes against it. This is what I had come for, and I had to get it now before the wooden ship was gone, and there was nothing to get me back to the other side of the plank and the staircase. I flung one leg over the railing, and a fortuitous heave of the ship brought me back on, minus some scraped-off skin. Without thinking, I threw myself at the slender ledge with the pedestal. I landed, slamming into the far wall. Not a lot of room to move around, not a lot of room to make mistakes, especially since my exit was determined by the increasingly unstable corpse ship. No time to lose. I scrambled up and looked at the gold that had caught my eye. It fried my fang-born soul. I was mesmerized. It was a tiny replica of the ship that was currently being destroyed, perfect to the last plank and peg, in gold and silver and jewels. A silver sail was fully unfurled and fluttering. The oars were shipped unneeded. Some divine wind drove this vessel over imaginary waves. Another vessel. Instead of shroud-wrapped bodies, there were ranks of warriors lined up along the center of the ship. I looked more closely. Men and women, their clothing as carefully depicted as the details of the ship's architecture. Some were northern-looking in what I imagined was Viking period garb, complete with perfect little brooches holding on their cloaks and signs on the axe heads and swords. One of the figures wore distinctly Arab garb with a scimitar, and one wore skins and bore the barbed spear of what I imagined was an Inuit. Some were in post-medieval dress. Nearly all of them had tiny fangs. It was beyond the work of a loving artist. This was photorealistic. I could see whiskers and moles and individual jawlines, scars, a broken nose. A clue to the fang-born past. I had to take it with me. I picked it up, marveling at its likeness, stuck it inside my hoodie, and zipped it up. There was only one end of the burial ship left. Where the rest had gone or how this was being supported, I didn't know. Another piece snapped and fell into the abyss. All I knew was that I had to get going before that last fragment was gone, and I was stranded on this side. The female werewolf was clinging to a railing. When she saw me with the golden miniature ship, she lost it. Hauling herself over the railing, driven by pure rocket fuel rage, she charged me. One arm free, I lucked out and landed a solid right in her jaw. She went down to the deck. I hurled myself across the remains of the bow. I clutched the dragon's head, saw its teeth and tongue flicker, its eyes flash. It turned and darted at me, teeth snapping. I jumped, praying the fragile model wouldn't collapse. The last planks of the bow fell away as I leaped. The dragon's head shuddered, turned to dust. An unearthly howl behind me. The werewolf bayed her anger and bereavement. The stairs to the first floor had never seemed so far away. It took me forever to fall across the abyss. The werewolf vanished, mid-howl. The ship vanished, ghastly contents and all. I looked down and saw a flash of scales, purple and green and blue and gold, churning. A serpent turning on itself, consuming itself, creating the universe, supporting the world. I landed with room to spare, which meant I kept skidding until I smashed into a far wall. Stunned, I saw a light from beneath the churning nothingness. Something prompted me. I reached into my hoodie and pulled out the ship, cradling it in my arms. Shields lined both sides of it. They had to be personal insignia, family marks, totems of some sort. The light was dim. I held it close as I could. I needed to see more. So focused was I on inspecting one of the women's faces, I hadn't noticed how close I'd gotten. My nose bumped into one of the shields. a sickening tinkle of fragile breaking gold and enamel as it snapped off. I grabbed mist, caught it with my right hand. I held it up to inspect it. It burned its way into my palm. The golden ship melted. Screaming, I watched as it shivered and liquefied, the shields slithering their ways up my arm, the gold turning red hot. Where the heat from, I couldn't have said. I couldn't drop it now, even if I wanted to. The reddish gold moved like mercury, snaking, slithering, climbing my arm in burning, glinting streams. I recognized the phenomenon, but it was the burning, rather than the biting, of Pandora's box. Some of the gold drove straight through my skin, 1,000 needles through my pores. The shields shifted, as if they were scales being sloughed off, and found their way to the edge of the bracelet. Bone sharing, skin slicing, and I could see the tissue beneath. It only lasted an instant as the shields, now jeweled tiles, clicked into the place along my bracelet. The bracelet now reached from my wrist halfway to my elbow. A few of the shields didn't stop, and I watched in horror as several of the tiles went past the bracelet, flowing up my arm on the surface of the streaming gold. The molten metal was to my shoulder now, with no signs of stopping. I tried to scrape it off, and although I could make a faint impression on it, the gold was already a part of me. It was too much like trying to shove off my own burning skin. I got a blinding shot between the eyes for trying. My head flung back, but hitting the wall didn't even distract me from the pain. The gold reached my throat, a burning whisper, as it crawled up to my ear and then around my neck. 3 hard bolts being driven into the back of my neck and spine, 3 more along my right collarbone. I bashed my head against the wall again, trying to knock myself out, make the hideous pain stop. When it was clear that wasn't going to work, I considered the abyss. The gold slipped between my lips. I gagged, and then wasn't able to do anything. Not breathe, not worry, not live. My reality, my world, was being torn apart. And if you want to find out what happens, you'll have to get a copy of the book. Thank you so much for stopping by. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful Halloween. And don't forget to check out my website, www.danacameron.com, because you can see if I'll be doing an event near you. Bye-bye.